The convoy wreckage stretched for 11,000 kilometers. I know that number because I measured it. It was my job to measure it. Intelligence officer, 2nd grade, aboard the ISC survey corvette Unrelenting Margin, tasked with sweeping the V3 withdrawal corridor as their forces pulled back from the Denver theater. We were the cleanup crew, in the practical sense, confirm the retreat, log any stragglers, file a damage assessment. Routine paperwork for the end of a frontier skirmish that nobody in the interior had bothered to name yet. That was before we found the Callaway convoy. I want to be precise here, because precision is what this story requires. Not grief. Not outrage. Those came later, in private, in the 4 minutes I allowed myself before I put them somewhere I could not hear them and went back to my console. What the job required was precision, and so that is what I gave it, and what I am giving you now. The Callaway humanitarian convoy was 7 vessels, for colony transports, 2 medical support ships, and 1 light freighter carrying prefabricated shelters for the resettlement camps on Denver's southern continent. It had been granted safe passage certification under the Vethra Accord, a document the Vethra primacy had signed 11 years prior, in a ceremony I am told involved considerable ceremony and a formal exchange of translated texts. The convoy's identification transponders were active and broadcasting on all standard frequencies. Their running lights were on. Their hull markings, white on both flanks, the gold ring of Civilian Humanitarian Registry, were regulation size and undamaged. The V3 had stripped them anyway. That is the clinical term for what we found, and I use it deliberately. Stripped. The hulls were intact. The drives had been disabled, not destroyed, each engine compartment accessed, the primary motivator cores physically removed, the secondary reaction chambers cold vented so the ships could not even maneuver on emergency thrust. The communications arrays had been cut at the root. The distress beacon housings were empty on every vessel, not damaged, not shorted, not burned, unbolted and taken. Whoever had done this had worked methodically, ship by ship, and had ensured that nothing aboard those 7 vessels could move, call out, or drift to a shipping lane on its own. There were 40,212 people aboard the Callaway convoy when it departed Myra Station. We found all of them. None of them had gone anywhere. The environmental systems had continued cycling for some time after the V3 departed. I calculated a minimum of 18 hours based on the atmospheric residuals my sensors recorded in the pressurized bays. For 18 hours, the air had circulated and the lights had stayed on and the temperature had held, and then, one by one, the reserve cells had exhausted themselves and the ships had gone quiet and cold. I logged the casualty count at 14 hours 7 minutes and 32 seconds ship time. I filed the preliminary report at 14 hours 9 minutes and 1 second. I gave myself 4 minutes, as I said. At 14 hours 13 minutes and 1 second, I opened a new log and began the systematic documentation that would become the evidentiary core of what came next. I photographed every engine compartment. I photographed every communication array, the clean cuts, the remove housings, the absence of the distress beacons. I photographed the hull markings on each ship, in full daylight from the corvette's survey drone, making certain the gold civilian registry rings were unambiguous in every frame. I drafted a reconstruction of the V3 boarding timeline from the tooling marks and the atmospheric trace data. I built a chain of evidence that a military tribunal could follow without a single inferential leap. It took me 19 hours. My commanding officer, Fleet Colonel David Ostrich, reviewed my report in full. He did not speak for a long time after he finished reading. Then he said, quietly, that he was going to transmit it to Fleet Command Interior under a priority designation I had never seen used in 9 years of service. One I had, frankly, assumed was ceremonial. It was not ceremonial. The Ardent Reckoning was a standing force in being, which is a phrase the ISC uses for a fleet that exists specifically to answer a category of event that everyone hopes will never occur. It was not a rapid response squadron. It was not a punitive task group. It was not an expeditionary armada assembled over weeks from scattered postings. The Ardent Reckoning was prepositioned, pre-crewed, pre-supplied, and pre-authorized. It required only a threshold event and a command release. My report provided both. 912 hulls. That is what I am told departed Kethavar Station 14 hours after Fleet Command Interior received my transmission. I was still in the withdrawal corridor at the time, still running documentation sweeps on the Callaway convoy, when the Unrelenting Margins Command net updated with a movement advisory, a navigational notice, dry and bureaucratic, warning survey and logistics traffic in 7 adjoining sectors to clear the transit corridors. 912 hulls require a great deal of corridor. I had never seen the Ardent reckoning in motion. I do not think many people had. It existed in budget reports and doctrine manuals and, occasionally, in the kind of quiet conversations that senior officers have when they think junior officers are not within earshot. I had known it existed in the abstract way that one knows a fire suppression system exists, present, necessary, tested in theory, and devoutly hoped to remain untested in practice. The V3 primacy had apparently made a similar assumption about its practical activation threshold. They were wrong. I know the sequence of what followed primarily from the formal record, because by the time the reckoning reached the V3 frontier, I had been ordered to Myra Station to deliver my evidentiary package to the Tribunal Preparatory Office. I gave testimony for 2 days. I walked 3 senior advocates through the tooling mark reconstruction, the beacon housing photography, the atmospheric timeline. They were meticulous and quiet and asked good questions, and when they were finished they thanked me in a way that suggested the tribunal process was going to be, from a legal standpoint, brief. The second advocate, a small woman with the quiet manner of someone who had spent 40 years in courtrooms and found nothing there left to surprise her, went through the beacon housing photographs twice. She enlarged one image on her display, zoomed to the mounting bracket. The bracket threads were clean. No stripping, no heat scoring, no emergency pull damage. Whatever tool had removed those housings had been the correct tool, operated by someone who knew how to use it. These were not taken in haste, she said. No, I said. They were not. She nodded once and went to the next photograph. I do not think she needed me to confirm it. She was building the record the same way I had, one clean link at a time. The V3 primacy attempted diplomatic contact twice during the reckoning's transit. The first contact was a standard channel request, transmitted through the frontier relay at Sector 14 boundary. Fleet Command Interior received it, logged it, and did not respond. The second was a full-spectrum broadcast on military, civilian, and emergency frequencies simultaneously, the V3 equivalent of shouting. It named specific senior members of ISC Fleet Command by title. It invoked the VETHRA Accord by full formal citation. It requested, in language that my translator annotated as highly unusual register indicating institutional distress, that the approaching formation stand down pending a review process. Fleet Command Interior received that one too. Logged it. Did not respond. The Ardent reckoning does not negotiate. This is not a policy gap or an oversight. It is the point. The reckoning exists for a specific category of event, an offence so concrete, so documented, so morally unambiguous that the ISC has determined in advance that the response phase has no diplomatic component. I had read the doctrine once, years before, in a staff college supplement that most officers treated as theoretical background. The language was plain. It did not hedge. It said, when the threshold is met, the reckoning deploys, and it deploys in full, because a partial response to a threshold event teaches the wrong lesson. The lesson the ISC intends to teach is that there is no version of this that ends in a settlement. There is no fine, no territorial concession, no formal apology accompanied by change doctrine assurances. There is only the reckoning, and the accounting, and whatever comes after the accounting, which is entirely up to the party that forced the activation. The Callaway convoy fit that threshold without remainder. 40,212 civilians. Humanitarian registry. Safe passage certification. Disabled drives. Removed distress beacons. 18 hours of air, and then nothing. There is no version of that which opens a negotiation. The V3 home fleet sortied from V3 Prime on what my record access tells me was their third day of attempting contact. Considerable force, 140 warships, a figure that represented, according to the intelligence estimate I reviewed later, approximately 60% of their available line of battle strength. They formed a defensive perimeter at the Kethavar approach to their home system and transmitted a final contact request. The reckoning's formation did not alter course. It did not change speed. It did not respond to the transmission. What that looks like on a tactical display, I am told, is a formation roughly the diameter of a small moon, advancing at a pace that is neither urgent nor leisurely, the pace of something that has all the time it requires, because it is not going to stop. I am told that the V3 home fleet's perimeter held for approximately 4 hours after the leading elements of the reckoning crossed into visual contact range. 4 hours is a long time to look at 900 hulls coming toward you in formation, cold drives burning steady, running lights on, identification transponders broadcasting, no weapons hot, no threats transmitted, simply arriving in the way that a geological event arrives, without announcement, without anger, without any indication that your presence in the path of it constitutes meaningful information. At the end of the 4 hours, the V3 home fleet stood aside. The Primacy's senior governing council transmitted a formal acknowledgement of legal accountability 40 minutes later. The language had been prepared in advance, my translator noted. They had understood, at some point in the preceding days, how this was going to end, and they had used the time to draft it correctly. The Ardent reckoning held station over V3 Prime for 11 days while the tribunal preparatory process ran. The home fleet remained in system but did not approach. During that 11 days, the reckoning's hulls rotated through a maintenance cycle, systematic, unhurried, operating on standard garrison protocols. They were not there to threaten. They were not there to punish, not yet, not in the unilateral and extrajudicial sense. They were there because the Callaway convoy had happened and the ISC had made a promise, decades earlier and in full public record, about what would follow if it did. The promise was being kept. That was all. I returned to the unrelenting margin on day 6 of the reckoning station hold. Ostrich had held the ship at Myrith pending the end of my tribunal testimony, and when I came back aboard he handed me a mug of something hot and did not say anything for a while, and I did not either. The margin's tactical plot had the reckoning's formation on display. 900 points of light in a stable formation, clean and quiet over an alien world. Your documentation held, he said, eventually. It was clean documentation, I said. He nodded. That was the end of the conversation. I have been asked, since, whether what I felt in that corridor, in those 19 hours of photography and atmospheric sampling and tooling mark reconstruction, surrounded by 40,000 silent ships, was anger. People seem to want the answer to be yes. They want there to have been something burning in me that drove the precision, some fuel behind the meticulousness. There wasn't. Or if there was, I cannot honestly locate it. What I remember is the work. The next photograph. The next measurement. The next entry in the log, time-stamped, source-referenced, cross-indexed to the one before it. I remember thinking, clearly and without particular emotion, that the chain of evidence had to be unbroken, that every link had to hold, because the Callaway convoy had been 40,212 people, and they deserved documentation that could not be questioned, and so the documentation would not be questionable, and that was the only thing I needed to think about for the next 19 hours. The V3 had stripped those ships because they had made a calculation. Disabled, silent, drifting, the convoy would die slowly and the evidence would disperse. Cold vacuum is patient. By the time anyone found the ships, the tooling marks would be ambiguous, the atmospheric trace data would be gone, and the beacon housings would be just empty housings, possibly never occupied. They had not accounted for a survey corvette running the withdrawal corridor on a routine sweep. They had not accounted for a second-grade intelligence officer whose specific professional formation was the kind of forensic documentation that holds under cross-examination by senior military advocates. The reckoning is not something the ISC deploys to make a point. It does not function at the level of signal or message or deterrence. It is the answer to a specific question that a specific act has asked, and the answer has a fixed value that was determined long before the question was posed. The V3 asked it at Callaway. The answer took 14 hours to depart Kethavar station and several days to arrive. But it arrived on time and in full, as it was always going to, because the ISC keeps its records clean and its promises exact. I know this because I am the one who files the records, and I have never filed a clean one faster or with more care than I filed that one. 40,212 people. Every entry source-referenced. Every link in the chain unbroken. The work was the only thing I could give them. So I gave them all of it.